Talking poverty, and the 2014 Ghana Living Standard Survey by the Ghana Statistical Service showed that 6.7 million Ghanaians fall within the UN definition of poverty. The Ghana Living Standard Survey was conducted in 18,000 households in 1,200 enumeration areas between 2012 to 2013. Now, the survey revealed that 1 out of 12 Ghanaians are extremely poor. The survey also showed that Ghana has achieved the MDG goal 1, that is halving poverty. That's one that we should be excited about. But I guess there are a lot of question marks to it, and that's why most of us are not. We haven't even realized that we've achieved that much in our country. So my guest joining me to better understand this and what it really means, particularly to children and the family, is the Ghana country representative of UNICEF, Suzanne Namondo Ngonge. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning.
So I was going to say, they say we have, but no. We've achieved MDG Goal 1. We've halved poverty. Have we really in Ghana today?
Indeed we have, and I think your summary was fantastic. The first time, 1990, 1991, when the survey was done, the rate was 51.7%, I believe. And the last results that were unveiled by GSS at the end of last month shows that the numbers are 24.2. Therefore, it is half, more than half of what it used to be 25 years ago. Okay. So that's a massive achievement for Ghana,
really?
To be honest. No, it's a huge achievement.
But there are a lot of people who are still very poor.
No, I know. There are lots of buts in it, but at least let's celebrate the successful part. So it's a huge achievement. Not many on the continent have managed. I know that there are a few, for instance, South Africa, they started from a lower number anyways. And we will not really have the full picture until 2015 when everybody has to show their numbers. Okay. But it's huge achievement.
Because that's the deadline that we have.
That is the deadline indeed. But as you mentioned, of course, there are still some issues. I mean, even though we have halved the numbers, you know, 6.4 million Ghanaians are still poor.
Yeah, extremely poor.
They are still poor. Also, there's an issue of definition.
Okay, so how does the UN define poverty?
Actually, it's how the government defines poverty. I think the UN standard is living on less than $1.25 a day. And in Ghana, I think that corresponds, the number that is used is 3 cedis and 40 pesos.
Okay, that will still be less.
3 cedis and 40 pesos is not a very high number. So even for those that, for the 6.4 million that are classified as poor, you can imagine if you're living on 3 cedis and 40 pesos, it's still very difficult to sort of achieve, to live with dignity. To be able to consume what you need to consume. So that's still a huge issue. And a second point to that as well is the inequality that is still very high in Ghana. So for instance, what we now know is, 20% of the richest earn about 50% of the income that Ghana produces totally, whereas the bottom 20% earn only about 5%. So there's a massive gap.
That is so unfair.
It is hugely unfair, but not just, I mean, the moral argument also should be pushed. It's hugely unfair, but economically also it's not very good, because these people that are out of the mainstream economy don't get to participate, don't get the opportunity to grow that economy. And, it would be better for the country to achieve a better equity. I think that would help the economic growth more.
So as it is now, you say we should be celebrating because we've achieved something.
Yes.
Okay. that would be really hard, but yes, I think we've done something good. How would we see it trickling down?
Well, I think, on the one hand, clearly the successive governments have done some right things that have led to this. And so to continue doing some of those right things so that we can get an even faster rate at reducing that poverty. So some of the right things, the economy has grown, the GDP has grown, but also the government has had an eye to try and take care of the poorest people. So programs such as LEAP that target the poorest have been in place. Capitation grants, national health insurance scheme, for instance, all of those things have helped. But perhaps to do a lot more of that. There's a lot of discussion on how to grow the economy, and perhaps to make sure that the social protection bits as well, to taking care of the poor, is also expanded. For instance, LEAP. LEAP reaches only 1 out of 9 of those it should reach. So of that 6.4 million people, LEAP is reaching only about 71,000 or something like that. Now, the government has mentioned publicly that they intend to grow that number to double the amount. So that should be done as soon as possible. And I know that there's a lot of work happening headed by the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection to get us there. But those are some of the things that the government should do more. And recently, perhaps it's really hard to feel this success. I live in the country as well. I've been here for a year plus. I can understand that it's hard to feel it, largely because very recently also utility prices went up. So when utility prices go up, you know, everybody feels the pinch. On the one hand, you know, that meant that some subsidies were taken off.
On fuel.
And quite frankly, those subsidies on fuel, you know, it was really the well-to-do that benefited most. You know, if you have a car, if you have a generator, you feel that. You enjoy that more, so to speak, the subsidy, and you feel that. But those who are poorest did not enjoy the subsidy as much because they're not as plugged into that economy, right?
Sure.
But when you take it away,
then they feel it. Because transport prices will go up.
Exactly. So if you were paying, I don't know, 80 pesos for transport before, and now you have to pay 120, that's a lot of money. Even if you were paying 10 before, and now you have to pay 20, that's a lot of money. So those people feel it more. And I think that's where, you know, quite frankly, more should be done to make sure that they are cushioned from the effects. And all of this, I think, for UNICEF, for the UN family, is really about equity. How can we, it's good to look at the numbers now, who is rich, who is poor, and really study, you know, who is benefiting, who is losing. But how can we ensure that the children of the poor today have a reasonable chance of escaping the fate of their parents? And that's really increasing their access to opportunities.
Okay.
Good schooling, health care, etc.
So let's stick to the fair distribution now. How do we ensure that? How do we do it?
Target them explicitly. A lot of the programs that we do that are supposed to be for the poor and vulnerable don't really reach that group. For instance, National Health Insurance Scheme. I'm not advocating that we shouldn't have it. It should target broadly because those are some of the things that, you know, the benefits accrue when it's really broad. But it's not touching those people that need it the most specifically, if you see what I mean.
Do we know why?
Because they're harder to reach. I mean, you and I, you know a lot more. If there are benefits that are out there, you understand a lot more how to access those benefits, etc. If you were a lot more deprived, you might not have the same access to some of those things. But there are efforts. For instance, I come back to LEAP. I think LEAP is just one of those really promising programs. It's one of those social protection programs that really targets the poor. It's one of the more efficient at targeting the poor. I'm not suggesting LEAP doesn't have issues. It does. But among all the programs that government is doing, it's one of the more efficient in reaching that group.
Okay, so let's go back to health now. How do we ensure that it gets there? I'm interested in the national health.
Okay, national health, well, there are many different issues. You have to sign up to the health insurance scheme,
and
for instance.
You have to pay a certain premium.
There's the efforts to try and make sure that the poorest of the poor would get on. For instance, if you're on a LEAP program, you get signed up automatically. So you get some help through social workers, etc., to get on the program. But, you know, that sort of you getting on requires some sort of help, so to speak, whereas you who are working, etc., you have
can
it
just
a little
do it on your own by yourself.
Exactly. So that's what I mean by it's not always easy to reach the poorest of the poor.
So what would UNICEF be advocating then? Because your interest really is in the children and the family.
Our interest is there. I think is for UNICEF, while we should be celebrating this, while we should be working on improving the economy of the country so that, it can grow with more growth and more jobs, you have more people who can improve their circumstances, is not to lose sight of this issue of equity. I think that's something that the data is showing us. Let's not lose sight of that, because if we don't specifically try to address the equity issues, we will not improve at the rate we should. And in terms of poverty, something I just want to add is the largest number of poor people are actually children. Think about a household that's poor. You might have an adult male, you might have an adult female, but you have more children than the combined adults. And therefore, if you aggregate that, most of the poor are actually children. And in this issue of trying to make sure that those children have the opportunities of being able to escape the fate of their parents, you really have to be looking explicitly at the issue of equity.
But we still have, I think the data also said 1 out of 12 are extremely poor.
So if poor was 3 cedis and 40 pesos, extremely poor is 2 cedis. At extremely poor level, you cannot meet your food needs, your basic food needs.
We have people like that living in Ghana?
We do have people like that living in Ghana.
Wow.
We have many of those people living in Ghana.
Where are they? As in, where can we find them? Are there things that, as individuals living in our country, we can do? Instead of always look up to government, can we begin to, in a way, start solving those problems ourselves?
Well, everybody can do their own little bit in their corner, you can make sure that you're giving more opportunities to children in your life, for instance. I am assuming, many people have family members that might have less opportunities than they have had. Many people are supporting children to go to school. Many people are taking care of family that are in need, strewed around the country. But many of these issues really require explicit national focus to really be dealt with in an efficient manner.
And I'm not sure that this is exclusive to Ghana.
No.
Other African countries are going through. And I know that in some cases we're even way better with all.
You mentioned it, but that's the thing. Ghana has actually halved poverty. I don't think most countries can claim that on the continent. Again, as I said, we don't fully know. And the one country that I have in my head is, I know that South Africa has, but their numbers are very different. But most can't claim it. Look at the neighborhood. How many in the neighborhood of West Africa can claim that they have half poverty? So in that respect, Ghana really has been,
But you say, when you say you've half poverty, and we still know that there are a lot of people who are really hungry, who cannot even afford a meal a day, then should we be believing that and be celebrating it?
Well, you have to look at where you started from and where you are now, and then look at how you're going to get to that 6.4 million people left. So people clearly, globally, generally, are living better today than they did 25 years ago. That we can say. Having said that, of course, the shadow to this glitter of having reached MDG1 is that, well, we still have 1 in 4 that are poor. We still have 1 in 12, as you said, that are extremely poor. And inequality is still very high. And with inequality in the mix, it means that those that are poor and extremely poor, their chances of being able to escape that trap of poverty is not, they're not great chances. And so we should be looking at, as the government is looking at in terms of growing the economy and making sure that, there are more jobs, etc., that we can make sure too that people can move out of the current poor and extremely poor category that they are.
So the measures that we have, obviously they're not enough.
Need to do more. Again, to have gotten to this point means that something is working. Something is working, and the number of the economy has grown in the past 25 years. The social protection measures that the government has put in place has grown over the past 25 years. You know, the National Health Insurance Scheme, capitation grants, LEAP, etc.
You know, it's exciting that you're mentioning all these things, but people will say we have huge issues with the things that you're mentioning as well. But I guess you're looking at the positive side. I mean, because it can't all be.
No, but then that public debate should be happening in Ghana. Of course, again, you know, good things have happened. That should be celebrated, and really good things have happened. But we can get more things that are good.
You sit back and you observe. Do you see that we're talking about the things that we really should be talking about as a nation?
In Ghana?
Yeah. Because we're talking a lot of politics. We're talking a lot of party politics.
You said it.
But the social stuff.
And I wish more of that social stuff was being discussed and being debated, and people were actually really interested in some of these issues. There, for instance, we can do a lot more. For instance, if you live in location X and the school is not working in your area, or the children in the school are not passing exams, why are you not talking more about that? The government spends a lot of money on education, a lot, about 30-something% of the government budget, which is really high on the continent, and there are not many countries that spend that much money on education, for instance. The government spends a lot of money on education. A lot of that money goes towards teachers. It's actually paying salaries. But regardless, how are we making sure that those teachers are in school teaching the children so that they can learn something while they're in school and pass their exams? That should be discussed, and that people can do where they are.
Does it seem, you know, like as a nation, as citizens, we probably are not interested in these things? Because sometimes you talk about it, but how many people are really, really interested in hearing?
What can I say? But if more people were interested, perhaps more attention would be placed on those things, because people would be watching more. They would know what the issues are. If more people, their parents have a huge role. For instance, education. It's going to be my little sidekick for today. Education, for instance. Parents have a huge role to play. Clearly, the state has the role to play in making sure that education happens. But parents have a huge support role, and other community members have a huge support role. If you know that you send your children to school every day, yeah, you send them off to school. Well, do you keep an eye there? Did the teacher come? Did the teacher not come? Are teachers behaving well in school? Are they teaching you get results at the end? Did the children pass? Did they not pass? Are communities demanding more accountability of their schools, demanding more accountability of sort of government administration around them to make sure that schools work? You know, those sorts of things people can do. And
I get you.
The media can sort of help facilitate, and, you know, rather than talking just party
I
politics.
get you, but if we're talking, and we're talking poverty, so if you're looking at somebody who's really poor, the children are fortunate to be going to school.
True.
They're not getting the best. That parent is interested in other things, either going to the farm, trying to get food on the table when the child comes back from school, and the interest is not what you're learning in school. At least you're going to school. I didn't get the opportunity to go to school.
True, but imagine if those parents could be motivated to be more interested, and the community at large could be motivated to be more interested. Think of how much further those children will go generally. And if I know that perhaps the media raises it and people are not that interested to talk about the social stuff, and they just want to talk about the political stuff. But imagine if somehow there could be an interesting, creative way of getting people to talk more about some of these social things. I don't know. A little bit more progress perhaps might go.
So let me ask, is eradicating poverty the same as eradicating hunger? Are we talking about two different things here?
I think we're talking about, they're related, obviously. Eradicating hunger is that 2CD, is the extreme poverty ones we're talking about, because those are the ones that can't even meet their basic consumption needs. So eradicating poverty is a higher threshold, a higher bar.
All right. So now the goal really is not to have, but to eradicate. And the deadline is next year, which is 2015.
No, the goal for 2015 is to have.
The goal of 2015 is to have, okay. But ultimately, we want to eradicate.
Yes.
Would we get there?
Well, how much time do we have?
That's another one.
With time and the right policies, there's no reason to assume that we cannot get to a much, much, much lower number. Of course, I don't know any country that has no poverty, but clearly, you know, we can do a lot to get to a much lower number and ensure that people are living with increasingly sort of more dignity. They can afford the basics, yes, in their lives.
I'm tempted to bring in this. Sometimes we talk about poverty in Africa, but there is poverty in Europe and in America as well. And if they cannot completely eradicate poverty, how can we?
Oh dear. Okay,
they have all the beautiful opportunities.
We're veering towards the controversial here, but no, it's true. There's poverty everywhere, but also the minimum bar is much higher in many of those countries than in the countries than many of our countries, for instance. So you take countries like Sweden, you take countries, you know, Northern European countries, you take the North American countries, etc. Their minimum, they're not talking about 3 CDs and 40 pesos a day. That's not their minimum. Their minimum is a lot higher than that. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And also this issue of inequality, for instance, you also have inequality in some of the developed world. Yeah. But again, for instance, in Northern Europe, I know that it's lower than what we have here. So that means you do have some people who are very, very rich, you know, sort of richer than many others. But the gap between those at the bottom and those at the top is a little bit shorter,
okay,
so to speak.
Okay, all right. So you're on a special campaign to get us, you know, talking a lot more about the social issues that affect us. And with this particular issue of halving poverty, you want us to focus a lot more on fair distribution. So you're talking equity, equity, equity. Well, I want to say thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
Unless there's something that you want to touch on.
No, I think it was good. And I think something also is to mention the role that Ghana Statistical Service played on this. You know, it was a massive exercise. Took about a year to do. 1,200 enumerators, 18,000 households, etc. And I think it was really a job well done, and congratulations to them. And the sort of data that we have is data that we don't easily get in other countries on the continent, and that's something also to be really proud of, because it helps in the design of policies and programs that can actually improve the situation. Okay. Get where we want to get to goal-wise.
But how credible are these statistics that come out?
I think in this particular case, quite frankly, the work that was done, it's very credible.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you go on their website, you get all the presentations they did when they unveiled the results to us. And of course, going forward now, there's a lot of work in looking at, you know, really analyzing the data. For instance, UNICEF and DFID and the World Bank, UNDP, GSS is sort of leading this little group to look a little bit more at some of these poverty data and sort of try and understand, okay, so who is benefiting, who is not benefiting, you know, etc. So, no.
So did UNICEF play a specific role in this one?
UNICEF is supporting Ghana Statistical Service on this.
In what way you're funding them? You're giving them money?
Supporting financially, but also supporting in terms of helping to analyze some of the data as well.
Okay.
But it's not just UNICEF. For instance, DFID also supported. You know, Ghana Statistical Service has some supporters to help it get its work done. But it's a fantastic survey. Okay. Please look at some of the data and go out there and talk about some of what GSS found.
So let me end with a bit of what UNICEF is doing in Ghana. We're shifting, you know, a little bit from the issue of poverty. But you deal a lot with children.
Yes.
What are you focusing? What are you focusing now?
Well, UNICEF is well, our key role generally is to advocate for children's rights to be to be respected, so to speak, and working specifically with governments and other of government's partners for that to happen. In Ghana, the program areas we work in is water and sanitation, health and nutrition, child protection, social protection, and education. So in those specific areas, we work with partners in government and outside of government to implement government policies and plans.
So with the issue of health, I'm sure, you know, this issue of cholera is one that you're also focusing on. It's
well,
really disappointing that in the 21st century we should be battling with cholera in Ghana, you know, with all that we've been able to achieve.
And we can only hope that in future we will not be battling. But, you know, one hand you have cholera. Sanitation is one of those MDGs, for instance, that we're very far from meeting.
Why?
Why? Many reasons. I mean, the numbers are so low. Clearly, there's some deep entrenched reasons for why we have not reached it. Attitudinal mindsets. Some people just feel that perhaps it's hard to change people's behaviors and habits, for instance. When you talk about people defecating in the open, when you talk about, or not even going so far, when you're in Osu and you see people throwing trash in gutters and those gutters then overflowing and you're cooking right next to it, you know, it's just somehow the mind shift of ensuring that sanitation is really prioritized hasn't happened yet. You know, in school, only 6 out of 10 schools, for instance, have a water source, for instance. Only less than that, say 5 out of 10 have a toilet. So, well, if there's no water source, or not all of them have water sources, not all of them have toilets, what do you think those children are doing? And when they go home, well, there are no toilets there. What do you think they're doing? You know, and changing behaviors and changing habits is not an easy thing.
Yeah. We pray
but
that
lots of work is happening.
We pray that it gets better.
Yes, indeed.
All right, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This morning.
Thank you.
With
thank
us.
you.
Okay, so my guest Susan Namondo Ngonge is Ghana representative of UNICEF, joining me to talk poverty. So the fact that we've had poverty, that is something we should be excited about. So yeah, to Ghana. We'll come back with more. Stay with us here on the AM show.